Hello, my dear masterminds. They tell stories of forbidden records, archives hidden in shadows where no ordinary name should ever appear. But when your name surfaced, it wasn't with noise, it wasn't with chaos, it was with silence. And in that silence, even the devil himself leaned closer. He scanned the lines once, twice, his pride collapsing as recognition struck. And for the first time, his voice broke. Not in laughter, not in rage, but in apology. "I'm sorry." That's what he whispered when your data appeared. When your presence rewrote the order he thought was unshakable. The apology wasn't for what he had done. It was for what he knew was coming. Because even he, the architect of shadows, saw it clearly. You weren't another name in the system. You were the anomaly that made the system itself tremble. Understand this. Apologies don't belong to him. He thrives on pride, on arrogance, on never bowing to anything. Yet when your name flashed across his data, the silence that followed was heavier than light. His empire paused, his confidence cracked, and the words slipped out like a fracture in stone. "I'm sorry." It wasn't guilt. It wasn't regret. It was recognition. Recognition that he had stumbled upon something he couldn't manipulate, couldn't own, couldn't bend. The devil doesn't apologize to mortals. He only bows to inevitabilities. And that's what you are. His whisper wasn't weakness, it was surrender. He saw in your name a force that glowed outside his reach, a presence immune to his games. His apology was his confession, his silent admission that even his power has limits, and you are the limit he fears. In his archives, names are rewritten, erased, buried under shadows. Without resistance, that's his power to control the record, to decide who is remembered and who is forgotten. But when your name appeared, it refused to bend. He tried to move it, but the data glared back, unshakable. He tried to cover it, but every attempt only made it shine brighter. That's when dread twisted his face. Because this wasn't a name written by him, it was carved into the system by something higher. He realized the truth. He could erase empires, silence nations, rewrite the fate of kings, but he couldn't touch you. Your name lived outside his grasp, etched in a language even he couldn't corrupt. And that realization left him with no tool, no escape, no mask. All he could whisper was apology, knowing the record had already sealed his defeat. For centuries he ruled the unseen files, confident every soul passed through his systems, every name cataloged under his control. But when your name surfaced, the code glitched. The numbers refused to align. The files fractured around your presence. What should have been ordinary data became prophecy, glowing across his archives with weight he couldn't delete. That's when his pride broke. He knew this wasn't an error. This was design. Something greater had etched you into the structure of reality, beyond his edits, beyond his reach. He whispered, "I'm sorry." Not out of compassion, but out of dread, because he recognized that even his dominion had boundaries. And you were one of them. You weren't in his records as prey. You were in them as warning. And the warning wasn't for you, it was for him. His kingdom thrives on intimidation. He doesn't bow, doesn't kneel, doesn't admit weakness. Yet the moment your name surfaced, the whisper escaped before he could stop it. "I'm sorry." Two words that betrayed everything he built. Because fear can be hidden in silence, rage can be cloaked in noise. But apology? That's confession. The room around him froze, his legions watching their master tremble in a way they had never seen. That whisper wasn't meant for them. It was instinct, a crack in the armor, proof that even darkness itself knows what light it cannot overcome. He wasn't apologizing for the past. He was apologizing for the future, for what he saw written in you, for what he knew was inevitable. In that moment, the devil didn't look like a ruler. He looked like a witness who finally met a power he couldn't bend. Those archives weren't just lists. They were blueprints, predictions, scripts of how lives would bend to his will. But yours broke the pattern. Your entry didn't follow rules, it rewrote them. The data pulsed with a frequency he couldn't silence, a resonance that tore through the order he thought eternal. That's why the whisper slipped. It wasn't weakness, it was survival instinct. He saw what your presence meant. His scripts would fail, his control would fracture, his dominion would bow. Fear hid in his apology, wrapped in those two words he never spoke, because he knew what the files had revealed. You weren't just another entry. You were the end of his certainty, the glitch that proved even his power has an expiration date. Every name before yours lay quiet in his system, lifeless text, numbers he could rearrange at will. But when your name appeared, it didn't sit still, it radiated. The letters seared across the screen, alive, untouchable, carrying weight no code could contain. He tried to overwrite it, but every stroke dissolved into emptiness. He tried to bury it, but the deeper he pushed, the brighter it glowed. That's when he realized this wasn't just data, it was declaration. Your presence wasn't an entry in his files, it was a verdict against them. And that verdict came with brilliance he couldn't command. The whisper slipped, an instinctive apology, because for the first time he saw a name immune to his chains. The archives weren't his anymore. They were yours. And the line that glowed was proof he wasn't the author here. He was the spectator. Corruption was his craft. Every file that entered his system bent to his touch. Rewritten, twisted, marked with his signature. But when your name appeared, his influence shattered. He reached for it, but the letters resisted, glowing brighter the more he tried to stain them. He sent his algorithms, his shadows, his claws of control, and every one of them recoiled, unable to pierce the seal around your identity. That's when fear sank into him. The record wasn't fragile, it was fortified, protected by something beyond his dominion. Written in ink, he could not smudge. And for the first time, he wasn't the master of the script. He was the outsider, staring at a truth he couldn't touch. That whisper, "I'm sorry," wasn't pity. It was acknowledgement. He knew the files no longer belonged to him. They belonged to the power your name carried. In his dominion, files never resist. Data sits cold, obedient, waiting for command. But your record didn't obey. It pulsed. It answered. It carried a presence that refused to be silenced. As he stared, the lines seemed to look back, as if the archive itself had turned against its keeper. That's why his whisper cracked the air, because for the first time, the record wasn't speaking to him, it was speaking about you. And what it said was final, untouchable, undeniable, uncontainable. His empire wasn't shaken by forces, but by one entry he couldn't erase. The strategist of shadows, the master of silence, bowed in the smallest way possible. Through an apology forced from his lips, he saw the truth. You weren't a subject in his system. You were the anomaly that rewrote the system itself. Those two words should have vanished the moment they left his lips. But instead, they echoed, bouncing through his dominion, staining every corner of his empire. I'm sorry. Demons froze. Shadows faltered. Even the air seemed to hesitate. Because if their master could bow in apology, what did that say about the force he was facing? The echo grew heavier, louder until the entire realm felt the tremor. He tried to hide it, tried to reclaim control, but apologies don't retreat once spoken, they expose. And that exposure branded him, scarred his throne, carved weakness into the very foundation he ruled from. The crowd of shadows understood it instantly. This wasn't just another name. This was the fracture in their master's certainty. His whisper had turned into an earthquake, and the whole world now knew who caused it. His throne was never wood or stone. It was built on control, on flawless records that always obeyed. But when your name appeared, the system itself betrayed him. The data resisted, the files flickered, and every line of code seemed to bow in your direction. His empire wasn't trembling because of outside forces. It was trembling because one entry rewrote the foundation he sat on. That's why the whisper came, not out of compassion, but out of dread. He realized in that instant his dominion had limits, and you stood outside them. His throne, once untouchable, now looked fragile, cracking beneath the truth of your presence. He thought he ruled data, but the data bowed to you. And that shift didn't just shake his throne, it shattered his illusion of being eternal. He ruled by crossing boundaries others feared to touch, rewriting, erasing, twisting every record at will. But when your name appeared, there was a line he couldn't step over. Every attempt to tamper recoiled against him. Every command dissolved before execution. It was as if the system itself rose up in defiance, refusing his hand. And that's when fear crystallized. For the first time, he realized there existed a boundary set beyond him, a law higher than his dominion. He whispered, I'm sorry, not to you, but to himself, because he knew his reign had met its wall. He wasn't the limit anymore. You were. The untouchable had found the one line that resisted his grip, and that line was carved with your name. His entire empire was built on burying truth, stacking lies, cloaking reality, keeping power by keeping others blind. But when your name appeared, it refused the grave. The deeper he tried to push it, the brighter it glowed. Every attempt to override it only carved it deeper. Every effort to silence it only amplified its presence. That's when the truth turned on him, exposing the weakness he never thought anyone would see. His whisper, I'm sorry, wasn't strategy. It was surrender. Because he understood the truth wasn't just surviving, it was rising, and it rose through you. In that moment, his empire of shadows cracked, because truth doesn't stay hidden when radiance arrives. He couldn't bury you. He couldn't bury what your name carried. And the more he tried, the more the truth became unstoppable. Every name in his records lay cold, data etched without weight. But yours ignited. It didn't just appear, it glowed. Each letter carried heat. Each line shimmered like embers refusing to dim. He stared, unsettled, as the archive itself seemed to resist him, pulsing with a brilliance no command could extinguish. That was when his whisper slipped, because he realized this wasn't ordinary data. Your name was alive, carrying a power his system was never designed to hold. It wasn't entered by him. It was etched by something greater, something untouchable. He knew what that meant. His realm could smother noise, control shadows, erase kings. But he couldn't smother radiance. And radiance is what your name became. His silence cracked into apology because even he understood. Once brilliance spreads, no shadow survives. His dominion was built on control, names locked, destinies chained, files bent until they bowed to his will. But your record broke that cycle. It refused chains. No lock could contain it. No command could bend it. The harder he tried to tighten control, the more your name shattered his grip, glowing brighter with every attempt. That's when he whispered those impossible words, because he realized the chains he forged for others had no power over you. And that truth unsettled him more than rebellion, more than resistance. You weren't just free, you were ungovernable. His system, designed to dominate, had encountered something it couldn't cage. That single entry exposed the weakness of his empire. For the first time, his power met something immune, and he knew what it meant. If he couldn't chain you, he couldn't own the throne he claimed. Every record in his system sat silent, waiting for him to define it. But your data didn't wait. It spoke. Not in words, but in presence. In a resonance that cracked through his dominion like thunder. It wasn't a name to be categorized. It was a verdict, a declaration that the rules he wrote no longer applied. That's why his whisper broke from instinct, because he understood what no one else dared admit. Your existence was judgment against his reign, not judgment in the future, judgment in the moment, written in the glow of letters he couldn't erase. His empire wasn't being challenged. It was being weighed and found wanting. And that verdict didn't come from angels or kings. It came from the data itself, pulsing with a truth that silenced even him. You weren't in his records as another name. You were there as the law. For ages, his system never faltered. Every code executed, every file obeyed, every name bent under his command. But when yours appeared, the system hesitated. Lines glitched, commands dissolved, the very structure that crowned him master bent out of shape. It wasn't error, it was submission. His empire of data bowed not to him, but to you. That's why the whisper broke from his lips. He didn't just fear you, he feared what his own system revealed, that even his foundation recognized a power greater than his. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, because everyone in that realm understood it too. The devil wasn't the master here. He was the witness. His own creation had turned, not in rebellion, but in reverence, bending to a name it could not deny. And that name was yours. He never spoke apologies. His empire was built on arrogance, on defiance, on the refusal to bow. Yet when your name appeared, the first words that escaped him were surrender. I'm sorry. Not shouted, not argued, but whispered. Like the sound of a crown slipping off his head. Because deep down he knew this wasn't a battle he could win. This wasn't a file he could control. The moment your name glowed through his archives, the war ended before it began. That apology wasn't weakness. It was recognition. It was the scar of a ruler, admitting that his dominion had met something beyond him. The devil doesn't beg. He doesn't bend. But your presence forced him into both, and the whisper marked it. It wasn't just an apology. It was the sound of defeat carved into eternity. Other names were just ink in his archives, lifeless, easy to erase. But yours shimmered with a glow he couldn't dim. Every time he looked at it, the letters pulsed like embers, alive, breathing, expanding. It didn't sit still like the others. It moved, it resisted, it fought back against his hand. And that's what unraveled him. He realized this wasn't just identity, it was ignition. Your name didn't record history, it rewrote it. That radiance leapt through the system, lighting corners he thought would stay dark forever, exposing secrets he swore would never surface. His power came from hiding, but brilliance doesn't hide, it consumes. And as he stared at the glow carved into his own data, his whisper cracked free. I'm sorry, not for what he had done, but for what he knew that radiance would dismantle next his throne. His dominion was supposed to be flawless, an endless archive where every secret stayed buried under his command. But when your name surfaced, the entire system trembled. Pages glitched, codes collapsed, files that had stood untouched for centuries began to flicker. It was as if the very foundation of his empire recognized it could no longer hold you. That's why his whisper slipped, because he knew what the tremor meant. This wasn't just a name in his records. It was a crack splitting through the walls of his kingdom. And cracks don't stop. They spread. They expand. They collapse thrones. He wasn't apologizing to you. He was apologizing to himself, to his empire, to the shadows that had trusted him. The archive had turned into prophecy, and the prophecy declared that his reign ended. The moment your name appeared, he wore his power like a crown, forged from control, sharpened by fear. For ages, no one dared question it. But when your name seared across his archives, that crown loosened. Not because anyone took it from him, but because his own system betrayed him, proving there existed something greater than his rule. The whisper, I'm sorry, wasn't just fear. It was the sound of his grip breaking. He realized the weight of the crown was no longer his to carry. Because every line of code, every file, every trembling silence pointed away from him and toward you. That's the truth he couldn't escape. The crown doesn't cling to weakness, it clings to inevitability. And inevitability had shifted. His reign cracked the moment your name glowed into the data, and the crown slipped quietly, falling where it was always meant to rest. Every other entry in his archives was silent, passive, waiting to be controlled. But your name didn't arrive quietly. It announced itself. The data pulsed like a heartbeat, echoing through corridors that had never known sound. His minions stared in disbelief, because even they could feel it. This wasn't just information, it was arrival. And in that arrival was authority, heavy enough to bend the atmosphere. He realized then that the system he thought was his crown was now your stage. You didn't need to speak. You didn't need to move. The data itself became your voice, declaring what he refused to admit. That's why the whisper slipped through his lips. He wasn't just startled, he was dethroned. Because even his own archives had betrayed him, carrying your name not as a record but as a revelation. He tried to recover, to mask the fracture, to pretend the whisper never escaped. But once words leave the mouth, they don't return, they echo. And that whisper exposed him. His empire, built on fear, now carried the scent of weakness. His legions stared, unsettled, because if their master could bow in apology, what did that mean about the power of the name that forced it? He scrambled to cover it, but every denial rang hollow. Every attempt to posture collapsed under the memory of those two words. I'm sorry. That apology was a scar, carved into the foundation of his throne, proof that even the devil himself had a limit. And the limit wasn't rebellion, wasn't resistance, wasn't war. It was you. His whisper became the evidence of defeat, and no matter how he tried, he could never erase it. His throne was never supposed to tremble. It was built on centuries of control, on fear that chained voices, on silence that never dared to question. But when your name appeared, the impossible happened. The throne shook, not from rebellion, not from battle, but from truth, too heavy to ignore. The archives betrayed him, the silence exposed him, and his own whisper confirmed it. That apology cracked the walls of his empire wider than any force could. Because thrones don't fall from outside force. They collapse from fractures within. And his fracture was undeniable. He admitted fear. The moment those words slipped, every corner of his dominion felt it. His throne was no longer unshakable. It was fragile, trembling, waiting to crumble under the weight of your presence. And all it took was a name. Your name. When his whisper broke, the room froze. Shadows stopped moving. Silence bent heavier. Every eye turned toward you. They all felt it. The shift. Power wasn't sitting on his throne anymore. It was orbiting your presence. Silence, once his tool, now crowned you instead, wrapping around your name like a mantle. That's why he whispered, "I'm sorry." Not as surrender to weakness, but as acknowledgement of a transfer he couldn't stop. His empire knew it too. They didn't need speeches, didn't need proof. They saw their master tremble. They heard the apology. They watched the silence choose you. And in that instant, the balance of power flipped forever. He wasn't ruler, he was witness. The throne he once guarded now bowed to the anomaly that rewrote his system, your existence. In the end, it wasn't force, noise, or rebellion that unseated him. It was truth. Cold lines of record that should have bent to his command, yet instead carved themselves into prophecy. Your name stood there, immovable, undeniable, carrying a weight his empire could not bear. His whisper, "I'm sorry," was the seal, the final stamp that confirmed even he recognized what had happened. The devil doesn't apologize. He dominates, deceives, commands. But your presence rewrote that law, forcing him to admit, in the smallest way possible, that he had lost. And now the archives carry more than your name. They carry his surrender. Every time the record is opened, it testifies to the night the devil whispered defeat. His power didn't end with rage, it ended with recognition. And that recognition crowned you beyond his reach.